Hello, everyone. Welcome to the five-part series on community management. My name is Judy Gordon, and I'm the VP of Marketing for OmniSparx. I'm sitting here with Disruption Joe from the Chicago Blockchain Project.
Hi, everybody.
Today we have a really wonderful webinar, a community manager Q&A panel. We have Adam from Consensus, Camille from OmniSparx, and joining us a little bit later will be Brady from District 0X. But before we get started, a couple of housekeeping tips. You should see a chat function in your view. Please enter any questions there or on the OmniSparx Telegram channel at OmniSparx. We will be answering questions at the end. Today is the fifth and last webinar in our series. But before we get started, a quick introduction to the sponsors. OmniSparx is the premier collaboration platform for crypto organizations to create and share value within their communities. For more information, visit omnisparx.io. CBP is building an infrastructure for the city of Chicago, connecting builders with resources and investors. And now let's move on to our panel. Again, today we have Camille Landa from OmniSparx, Brady McKenna, who will be joining us in a bit from District 0X, and Adam from Consensus. Thanks, guys.
Hi. Well, it's a pleasure to be with everyone on the webinar and with these folks, including Adam, who I've had a chance to speak to about his community efforts, and I'm very impressed. So first, I just wanted to ask you, Adam, to tell us about the community you manage and introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Thank you all for having me, Camilla, Joe, Judy. I had the pleasure of meeting you guys in Chicago during Voice of Blockchain, which was a stellar event. Looking forward to the next one. So yeah, I've been involved in the blockchain community for about a year and a half, a little under a year and a half now. I've had previous roles at different tech companies, kind of supporting different community management, community marketing efforts, from small business to developer and enterprise, really kind of the full stack of kind of community management. But what I'm focused on here at Consensus is supporting what we're calling new and emerging community markets. So traditionally, regional markets are kind of focused on cities or states or countries. Because we're still kind of growing and because the need's so great, there's a need to kind of create systems and programs around supporting organically built communities. People that are passionate about blockchain, passionate about Ethereum, passionate about Consensus, and connecting with them and figuring out better ways and creating systems and programs to support them. Pre either hiring someone that maybe be a community manager in that region, or pre possibly having a regional presence in one of those cities. So my focus is kind of figuring out ways to support those communities, and then also figuring out ways to kind of support events that are strategically important to kind of the ecosystem, the Ethereum and blockchain ecosystem, in regions where we don't have a full-time presence. So that's what I've been doing over the past, a little over a year and a half at Consensus.
That's great. Let's just jump right in to the questions that people who are in similar positions or perhaps thinking about it will be hopefully interested in.
Sure.
So many projects have a hard time around maintaining engagement. And how do you think about engagement, and what do you do to increase it?
Sure. So I would almost take a step back. If you're going directly into engagement, I think that's perhaps the wrong way to go about it. I would say taking a step back and understanding like who your community truly is, like creating a kind of what do you call those, where you kind of say, okay, so we're focusing on the middle America. We want soccer moms and soccer dads to start working on X or start using X product. Creating a kind of a diagram of what that person looks like, and then start to create, like, once you have that person in mind, then you can kind of figure out, okay, where do these people live? Where do they go? What do they do online and offline? And then from there, it's really going to them. I think that's the first step of engagement. Because if you don't know the baseline, you'll never be able to kind of approach it from a kind of a systematic approach, right? So I think number one, you need to kind of understand who they are, where they're located, and start going to them. That's the first step of engagement. Then it's just really just kind of talking to them, like understanding where their needs are, understanding what they're interested in. And this is even before they even perhaps know what your product or service or anything is. Just kind of understanding them from top to bottom. Once you have a really core concept of what this person or what these groups of people that you're trying to interact with look like, then you can start kind of creating systems and programs to engage, and start with like a very small kind of sample size. Because if you go full blast, you're probably going to turn some people off that you might actually be really, sad to see go, or potentially join the community you're trying to build. So start with like a small sample size of folks that you think would be of interest. Start sending them information, maybe ask them to sign up to a newsletter if you're attending a meetup, or if you're going to, if you're online and you see that people are talking about a certain subject, send them like, oh, this might be of interest to you, check this out. And just start like a dialogue, start a conversation. Because really like that's where community starts and ends. It's all about the communication. So when we're thinking about engagement at Consensus, we're really thinking about, because we are still pretty new in the market, even though I think Consensus is pretty well known now, at least amongst blockchain. We're thinking about where should we go to these folks so we don't make them uncomfortable with what we're trying to kind of actively build out or what we're trying to do. We want to kind of go to them and ask them what they care about and start building from there. And that's kind of how we've done it over the past year since really the community team was launched. So
that's great. So it sounds like you're using principles of lean startup and customer development as you think about community, in which you're really making sure that you're serving your community as a customer.
Yep, exactly. At the end of the day, we're really trying to find ways that they can buy into us. Like we want them to understand what we care about, what we're thinking, and be very transparent. I think community is also very much about transparency. So yeah, I completely agree.
So what are the challenges that you see? What are the most challenging aspects of community management, and how do you frame your overcoming of those? Whoops, can I still hear you?
I muted myself.
Oh, you muted? Okay.
It's very loud. It's very loud here.
Adam, so I definitely want you to answer that question from the top, the challenges. And by the way, I want folks to hear about your colleague who used to work with a certain president too, because that came up in an earlier conversation.
Sure. So challenges are really depending upon where you're at in kind of the community journey. If you're, started at the very beginning, the challenge is just trying to getting people to buy into what you're kind of offering them, and having them understand that what you're doing is trying to support them, being authentic, right? And then if you already have established community, like how can you continue to support them and really give them the tools to kind of self-manage? There's a great group that I used to go to a lot of their events, and I haven't in a while, called Creative Mornings. It's essentially a volunteer organization that every morning, once a month around the world in different cities, like thought leaders from marketing to PR to business to the whole full stack of business kind of skills, will host events focused on supporting their local communities that want to kind of teach them different skill sets, different tools, kind of start the morning in kind of a productive manner. You kind of get into the day. I don't know if you've ever gone to a morning event, but usually when you go start your workday, you kind of have all these fresh ideas. And that's really the goal of the creative morning kind of mission. So I think starting from a place of understanding is probably the best way to go. But yeah, it really just depends on where you're at in your community building from challenges. For us, Consensus. So Consensus is kind of looked at in a couple different ways inside the blockchain space. One is people don't know blockchain, they don't know Consensus, so you just kind of introduce it, right? That's kind of the most straightforward one. But folks that are really like passionate about blockchain and kind of understand what we're up to and what we're building, sometimes kind of look at you a little different, because the blockchain community, I would say, because of the inherent nature of blockchain being kind of a decentralized kind of way it's built out, the idea of having like a centralized consensus, like a business, like this entity kind of coming into your city, like we're going to take over your community and you have to listen to us. Like that's not the message that we're doing. Like, and I think a lot of the programs that we're kind of building out kind of showcase that, where it's really just focused on support and listening. I think everyone knows the adage, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It's all about listening, right? And talking about your second point, so this actually goes into that 2 ears and 1 mouth. So yeah, one of my colleagues used to work with a former president. He told me a story about that he said this is one thing that people just understand about this guy is it didn't matter who you were, where you were in the world, whether you're walking down a hallway in a high school and a janitor stopped him, or whether it was the prime minister of another country. He said he would say that if somebody asked him a question, whether it was very technical, highly like evolved to, how's your day going? He would just he would stop everything. He would stop Air Force One. He'd have a conversation with them. And he's like, that's really what this is all about, right? Like, if you're going to build a community, you have to get into this and like really hear these folks out. Because if anyone, doesn't matter if you're a small business owner, a developer, enterprise folks, C-level executive, whomever, you need to be able to kind of sell yourself as much as you're kind of selling what you're trying folks to kind of buy into, right? So it's really all about like that listening. It's about that listening channel. And then from there, you can come from a place of strength, right? You can really build up programs because you know what you're trying to do with this community. So that's how I would approach that.
That gives me confidence in that former president. I'm glad to hear that.
I won't say who it was. It could have been any one of them. It could have been Abraham Lincoln,
Okay.
People of consensus. No.
So regarding listening, community management can be stressful in part because it's 24 hours, in part because community can include skeptical people, people with agendas. How do you manage the less friendly parts?
Less friendly parts. What do you mean, like people with agendas, or what do you mean by that?
Well, in the worst case, a troll.
Okay, trolls. I mean, a lot of the times the good thing about if you're building like a really strong, like self-organized, like focused community is you don't have to do anything. A lot of the times the community will take care of it for you. I've been pretty fortunate that a lot of the folks that I've worked with, whether like I mentioned, small businesses or developers, are pretty quick to like point out those people and be like, you know what, I don't think you need to be a part of this right now, or you just kind of stop paying attention to them. There's been times where I think you have to kill them with kindness. I think that's probably the best way to do it. I can think of an event recently that I attended where we were focused on kind of introducing kind of more technical aspects of like blockchain, focused around actually like potential support through one of our organizations inside of Consensus called Labs. And there's an individual who was very upset about not going through this application process to potentially, oh, hey, Brady, to potentially be brought on and like kind of work closely with Consensus. And we actually kind of said, hey, we understand that you're upset. And we said this in front of everyone. We said, let's sidebar this. Let's take this offline here, off of this event, because we're doing a Q&A session. Let's sit down and chat with you. And the guy actually, I think he felt a little bit bad because he really kind of exploded in front of everyone. He ended up leaving. So I think that's because like it wasn't even us saying like, hey, let's sit down and chat with you. We want to like work through this. It was him realizing that like the community was kind of looking at him like, guy, like these guys are trying to be nice. They want to work through this. And then he just forced himself to leave. So like, that's why I kind of say like, you got to kill him with kindness and really let the community kind of do the organizing, and it's to a certain extent.
That's real success. Brady, how do you deal with, for lack of better termage, trolls? And do you have a story about trolls in your past?
Sure. Can you hear me?
A little bit. We can sort of hear you.
Okay.
Kind of. Let's see. I guess we can't really hear you. All right. Well, we'll wait for Brady to come. Let's see. Brady has come back.
How about now?
Oh, much better. All right.
Good now?
Well, a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Killing trolls with kindness was your strategy. Is that what you said? Yeah. I think that would be one of the primary approaches that I think you kind of default to that after dealing with a lot of people. You have to, really. I mean, I take the hug a troll approach more often than not. And I love telling the story about one of my first trolls in my community who is now one of my main moderators. So that really says a lot, because sometimes someone's a troll just because they're having a bad day, not necessarily because they're trying to really cause you harm or issues. You never really know what their issue is, and getting on their level on more of a human to human level, you tend to learn a little bit more about the situation, and then they see you very differently, and sometimes you can turn that around. Not always, but it's definitely worth a shot to try and see. And like he was saying, that's sometimes they see their own faults when they see how you're approaching it, as opposed to them just being rude all the way through the whole situation.
That's great. I'm going to go with kindness. So how have your communities changed since you've started working with them? And I think there has been a lot of change, and not only in your communities, but of course in crypto moods in general. Brady, starting with you, how is this community different at this point in time?
Sure, a lot of the craziness and the hype cycle that any new technology goes through, we're kind of getting through a lot of that, and now people are really getting down and getting to work. So I'm seeing a lot of the people now that are more work focused. A lot of them are part of other projects. Some of them are collaborators with us. Some of them are open source contributors, rather than a lot of the just newcomers who don't really understand these technologies. They don't have the best interests of the projects in mind. And you see these different phases though, and we're kind of in that phase now, but I think I've seen like 3 or 4 different phases of very different demographics over the past couple of years, and over the past, not just in this community, but all the communities over the past several years that I've been involved in all this.
And you, Adam? Unmuting.
Sorry, just unmuted. Yeah, I completely agree with Brady. I think from when I started a little under a year and a half ago to where we kind of stand now, I actually think the folks that are attending these kind of local meetups and even some of the larger blockchain conferences are much more in it for the long run and much more in it for the actual business of building, or as we say, biddling. And I think that's at the core of this whole movement, right? Like once you kind of get those folks that are in it for the wrong reasons, whatever community it is, kind of out of the community, it just enables and strengthens the ties that bind the folks that are really in it for the right reasons. And for me, it's actually been fantastic, because now when I'm going to these meetups, the conversations happening are much more enlightening. The partnerships and the chats you're having with folks about kind of XYZ projects they're working on and what we're doing, perhaps a consensus, are much more fruitful. And you don't have to kind of start at a place of kind of not knowing if the person you're talking with is just going to go right into like, so now the state of crypto being in a down market, blah, blah, blah. They don't even talk, like most of these times, they don't even talk about it. They just kind of get right into like, oh, here's a project I'm building on blockchain, and I think that this is going to be really cool. So yeah, I mean, for us, and I think most of the other community leads, we have about 20 of them right now around the world, would agree. It's actually been, in a weird way, really, really beneficial to kind of the strengthening the community.
Cool. I'm glad that we're in this stage as well. And I think it changes our jobs as well. And do you, Brady, see the community manager role emerging as a different one beyond communication, maybe, into chief strategy officer or the like?
Yeah, I mean, you wear a lot of hats, because a lot of times with open source projects, you're not just community management. A typical community building, like at a traditional corporation, it has a very narrow focused goal of like customer acquisition. That's not the case now. Your funnel goes from like launching new projects, and then your kind of customer support for those new projects as they're getting off the ground, and then you're leading people into actually becoming developers and open source contributors, and then some of those people are getting into educational roles and teaching new people about that and bringing new people on. So it's more like this funnel to get contributors more so than customer acquisition. So the goals are in stark contrast. So it's really interesting. You end up kind of wearing all the hats and juggling them, and until you can get the community to do it, and then you just start getting them to fill in all those gaps and places. And it's not narrowly focused. In fact, there's entirely new paradigms we have to figure out on our own, pave our own paths. It's kind of fun, but it's chaotic at times.
Adam, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's definitely it can be challenging. I think community folks are expected to wear a lot of hats, and I think really one of the core channels of community building is offline events, getting people to meet face to face. Things like this are terrific where you can meet over Zoom and kind of chat, but when you're at an event, you're kind of fully in it, so it kind of takes you away from kind of the day to day kind of setting up program systems, supporting community from afar. But when you're like work with someone, you kind of got to be there. You got to be in it. You can't think about, oh, let me check this real quick and let me check my Slack channel. You can't do that. So it can be hampering. And a place like Consensus where, there's 50 plus organizations or programs or projects or companies inside of it, and each of them have kind of different business models. You're kind of figuring out ways like, okay, so we have this community of, right now, our network's over about 20K around the world, and it's growing pretty rapidly. So of those folks, who would make sense? Like which communities in Madrid could we plug into one of our projects at Uport, or who someone here in New York, or what community? Maybe New York's a great community for another project called Pegasus. Or there's another community perhaps in Hong Kong that's hyper focused on AirSwap, which is another program that was kind of launched inside of Consensus or project. So kind of understanding like what communities are interested in it can be daunting, especially at a place like Consensus with all of these different projects. But luckily we have a pretty strong community team that's regularly in communication, focused on their regions, understanding kind of what works and what doesn't work. And we really rely on those folks and, the people inside of the community to kind of let us know what they want to hear about, and what they want to kind of focus on. So yeah, in short, it can be challenging. You do have to have a kind of very high level vision of the overarching business. You might have to get into details like finance or legal, but you do have to have a high kind of eagle eye view of which way your business is kind of going in, so you can kind of create those programs, so you can plug in communities to different things, and you can plug those programs into different communities.
That's fascinating. So you're really making partnerships among communities that you work with, and you're listening to them, and you're listening to what needs and interests are and passions.
Yep.
That's amazing. Brady, you have been able to take a step back, I think, and think strategically. Not that you don't usually, but with the shift and with the work you've already done, and how has that created room for you to be to change your job a little?
It's made me think a little bit more about the physical world, because I haven't. When you go through those hype cycles, you just have tons of people coming into the community and so many new people interested in blockchain technology and smart contracts and all the different tools and economic primitives that are being developed. And it's really exciting. And then there's all these new people, and you're mostly just moderating chat rooms, and you don't get to think about things like physical events, which, Adam, I kind of wanted to ask you too, is in terms of physical events, that's, I know Consensus did like a virtual hackathon that was more online. I think in terms of strategy, I've really been watching that, and I kind of want to talk to you about that once we're off of this, because that is the direction I'm going now, is wanting to kind of bring people together in virtual hackathons, physical hackathons, because I feel like that is at the core of my strategy now, is now I can think about those types of things. And I don't know, maybe we can kind of kick it off and talk about that a little bit, because that's exciting for me.
Adam, actually, I would love your thoughts there too, because I've noticed that we really rely on physical events, I think ironically more in this space, because we're anonymous, we're decentralized, we're global. Adam, thoughts on your experience on building community with that at the center?
So building community like without events, you're saying, or?
with physical, actual live.
Oh, with I see. Yeah. I think it has to be a healthy mixture of both online and offline. It's just the world we live in. You can't like completely remove or separate the two. Like at Consensus, we have a social media team that sits in our content kind of strategy. And then we have the community team, which is both offline and some online. I mean, and they intersect like every day. So when we're doing different activations, we'll look for ways that we can kind of bridge those gaps and kind of scale out our visibility, right? So if we're going to be at a conference, we'll look for ways to get involved with the local community organizers that will maybe own some meetups in the area. And then we'll look for unique ways to kind of push out what we're doing inside of those events over those timeframes through our social channels, perhaps through blog posts, through email blasts to the region. And we'll look for ways to kind of, again, like scale up what we're doing, because that's the world we live in right now. We need to find ways that we can kind of bridge the online and offline divide, and kind of separating those two, I think, can be detrimental to your community building. So you have to have a pretty, I think as a good community manager or community lead, you have to have a pretty good baseline understanding of how social media works, how email newsletters work, how the marketing kind of funnel works. Because you really, as a community manager, you sit in many of those kind of levels. And you have to know how to do all of those things. So you're almost like a very small, I don't want to say small, it doesn't sound right, but you're kind of a mini CMO as a community lead. So you have to kind of think strategically about what you're trying to do, given in all those singular events. Because if you just do one event and you maybe connect with 5 or so folks and you just leave it there, like it was almost like the event never happened. It's like the adage, if a tree fell in the woods, did you even hear it? It's the same idea. So every single meetup that we plan, from Toronto to Johannesburg, we're thinking, okay, so we're planning this meetup. What are we going to do with this before, during, and after this event happens? And then really kind of reassess every single time. It's just a constant feedback loop. So so that's kind of how we're kind of approaching kind of our offline event strategy.
Great. It actually sounds like you've been honing some patterns, essentially like a playbook. And Brady, I think you'd mentioned the notion of, I don't think you used the word playbook, but that notion of knowing how to keep the community engaged, develop practices around that, and really use those practices to help you scale, because one person can't do it all. So any thoughts on your approach and philosophy to that, your philosophy of essentially sharing power?
Yeah, it's actually tough for me. I've kind of leaned on a lot of content creation, live streaming, and a lot of tools that I actually learned in live streaming before I even really did all this, because it can bridge that gap. And the live streaming community, I feel like, is a little further ahead in community building strategies than a lot of projects, because they've already had a lot of moderation tools. They're familiar with bots. They have a lot of tips and strategies. A lot of them learn how to collaborate and fill in those gaps. So I kind of use that because it fills in the gap of content strategy and community building in a very, very strong and straightforward way that's already been established in another industry. And you can kind of use that to kind of hobble along when it is just you. But you do, it's tough because like I said, I didn't have time to plan a lot of physical events like I would have liked to until now. Now I'm really starting to think about these things and organize it. And but that kind of helped get me through, and that's been my playbook, is mostly kind of studying live streamers and the way that they do things, even just gamer streams and things like that. A lot of them are really talented and really good at this.
I agree. What in order to scale our efforts at building our community, supporting it in its current state and in its growing state, how do you guys think about empowering other community members to play roles? Maybe starting with you, Brady.
Sure. I think, of course, everyone here is probably no stranger to building things like ambassador programs and evangelist programs and things like that. I think that's something I'm really wanting to focus on right now, and I'm just now starting to kind of build that out and learning from a lot of the other projects and doing that, because that allows you to kind of delegate those things in a very purposeful way. You have to be careful with the way you deploy it. So I'm being kind of light touch with it at the moment, and doing everything I can to kind of lead community members towards that. But I think one of the big ones is targeting developers, of course, because we're building open source projects. We want more developers, want to educate them about tools that are available, the frameworks that we're building, and the other projects that you can collaborate with. So you kind of have to funnel people into almost two brackets. Are they a developer, and are they just a user of these apps? Because that's kind of the two rails you want to go with. And you got to kind of identify those people in a non-weird way. You got to, without saying, "Hey, are you a developer? Go over here and stand in that corner." You got to be careful with the way you do it. And I've experimented with some ways of doing that, and just getting to know people on more of a personal level, and talking to them about what they're working on. That's something I'm doing at the moment, though, and I'm still learning myself.
Adam, any comments or other thoughts on how to essentially work yourselves out of the job you're doing now? Oh no, he just went on mute. Adam.
I wasn't ready. I know I went backwards that time. Apologies. Yeah. But I guess I remember when we had our first kind of kickoff call about this. We were talking about this, and you said, just like, oh, so it's kind of like you're working yourself into a job. And I was like, I've never really thought about it that way, but to a certain extent, I think you kind of are, right? Like as I mentioned before, what like the folks at Creative Morning said is like, you're not really a community until you can actually self-organize and self-manage yourself, right? So that's kind of what we're always trying to work towards. But for us, it's really just kind of understanding, okay, who are the folks inside of this community that would really be interested in getting together, kind of having a feather in their cap of kind of being a local leader inside of their city or their region, and saying, okay, what is it that like drives you? Understanding like their motivators, understanding why they're doing what they're doing, and then just really finding ways to kind of enhance their focus, enhance their kind of presence. And all we can really do is kind of support their efforts and support what they're trying to build out. And yeah, I think you named a couple of good strategies, like ambassadorship is a terrific strategy. I also think just kind of letting people kind of that are interested, like encouraging them or finding ways to kind of reach out to the community themselves, and ask for help, ask for support. So again, it goes back to this idea of kind of self-management, self-maintaining itself. So yeah, I think there are a handful of different ways that you can kind of go about it. But at the end of the day, you really want folks that are kind of those leaders inside those communities to kind of be actively engaged, actively involved, have a baseline understanding of what the kind of the core ethos of this whole community is. And those are the people that you really want to like nurture and kind of support to the best of your abilities. Not to say that, people that aren't like that, those leaders should be just like forgotten, like you're on your own. But the folks that are really like enabling the community to grow and enabling the community to support itself, those are your kind of your outliers, your stars.
On that, actually, I'm going to ask our last question from me, unless we have other questions. And Adam, there might be a friend or something in your space. You might want to go on mute for a second. And so I'll start with Brady. And do you use incentives? And if so, what kind? And what do you find effective? And what do you find mysterious about incentives?
Sure. This is a really tough one, and I've done a lot of research and experimentation and made a lot of mistakes. And I've even lost community members from some of my mistakes. And it's I've one of the first ones, of course, is like moderator privileges within chat rooms, or even just helping at events, asking for help. Sometimes the way you ask for help, you will lose a community member. And
really?
Yeah, for sure, because if you are asking for like some type of role with the project and you ask in the wrong way, or you give, it seems like a responsibility more than a privilege, that's where you have to be careful. And I've asked in certain ways that made it seem more like a responsibility than a privilege, and I have lost community members because of doing that. And that's unfortunate. That's kind of part of learning people and learning strategies and the way you word things and timing. It's really important to be really careful with the way you do that. And that's just that's not even like monetary or token incentives, which I've done some of that too, which you have to be careful there too. You need to be very clear with, if you're going to do like monetary incentives and token rewards, that it needs to be clear that it's kind of a temporary thing and just like a temporary faucet to kind of seed the community. If you have like a utility token used for a specific purpose, that's great. You do want some type of way for people to easily access it, but not like forever as a long-term thing, because then you only get people who are there to like get paid to be there instead of see it as a faucet to participate further. So again, that's part of wording, that's part of experimenting with the way you do it, the timing, and kind of cutting those programs off at certain times or starting them at certain times. And it's tough. It's different for everyone. I know a lot of other projects that are doing this as well, and I've seen them make similar mistakes. I've seen them have big wins. I've seen them carry it further. I've seen them cut it off too soon, and it's really interesting. And I'm just kind of watching other projects, watching my own project, and experimenting every day.
It really is experimental. It is not straight linear.
No.
Yeah. I mean, even though you'd think that incentives in a kind of financial format would correlate with results, it's not on a linear path, and that is so interesting. Adam, your findings there?
Yeah, just to repeat the question, it's kind of looking for ways to kind of support or kind of incentivize community growth.
Mm-hmm. And whether you use incentives, and what type of incentive you use. Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I would agree as well. I think financial incentives are, generally speaking, not ones that pay off the best, because you just don't get the right people in that way. You want to look for ways that kind of educate, enable, and encourage kind of self-growth. I think that's really at the core. I think there's two things that really drive communities. One is just being involved with like-minded individuals, and two is growing as a person, right? So if you're finding ways to kind of do those two things, you've hit like the sweet spot in the community building, whatever, Venn diagram. So for us, I think a lot of folks are really interested in the things that we're doing, the projects we're building, the locations of the world we're in, the events we're putting on, the people that are kind of working around the space. So really a lot of what we're trying to do is look for ways to kind of give tools, resources, and education to the community. So not only are they connecting with like-minded individuals kind of organically through kind of these meetup groups or events that they're attending in a local level, they're also learning and sharing their learnings with each other. I think at the end of the day, a lot of folks just love to share the things they know and love to kind of encourage other people to grow, because I think that's what makes you feel good, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I think that's the way we approach it. I think that's the way I think all community managers approach it.
I don't know if everybody has put their finger on it as clearly though as you, and so I do want it to be repeated, which is that essentially participation seems to be about human rewards. Being around people who share similar interest or values or both, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to help other people grow. It's great. And in a way, in some cases, money can be a disincentive in that logic. So, I think I want to end with one last question, is just what questions you each have in your own work that you're still thinking about, as in what do you want to understand even more about community building, and what are you sort of exploring in your own jobs and in your own roles? And I'll start with Brady.
I'm actually I'm an active learner, and I'm in the middle of a deep dive on some new topics and ideas and taking classes and everything at the moment. And I think one of the biggest questions I have is some of the more purpose-driven things. I think as a community manager, when you first start off, it's very reactive, so you don't get to really plan some of those strategies. So one of my questions for myself really is what is effective, what isn't effective, what are some of the things that I've been doing that are already like established strategies that I just need to enhance and focus a little bit more on. it's tough because I've caught myself doing things that are counterintuitive to my own goals just because I'm in that reactive state. And I think I'm just trying to hone those that focus in and see where those misalignments are in my strategy, and see what isn't even a strategy, because there's a lot of times that you do get pushed in that reactive state, and you have no strategy. You're just it's just chaos, and you're like, okay, I need to push that to the side and realign things, and that's kind of where I'm at the moment now that I can think.
Yeah, what a joy. And you, Adam?
Yeah, I would say there's really, I guess, two things going into the holiday season. One is just kind of, I don't think it's so much a challenge, but I think everything's been so reactive in this space because we're fairly still a small team, though we kind of stretch the globe. So kind of taking a step back and doing an audit of where we are, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and let's reassess for 2019. Because really, I think the core of community building, it's about kind of scaling up, because the more folks you have, the more ideas you have, and the more kind of support systems can be kind of implemented through all of the different kind of channels from around the world. So I think my big challenge right now is figuring out ways to support this network that I was mentioning to you. We're calling it the Biddle network. But right now we have about 30 or 40, so what we're calling ambassadors, Biddle ambassadors around the world, and I'm trying to figure out ways to kind of connect them and kind of have them kind of share their key learnings with one another. So not only are they connecting their networks and kind of sharing key information, but they're learning about different cultures, different kind of communities, and kind of still, again, going back to that idea of growth, of personal growth. So I'm kind of actively trying to seek ways or build out kind of systems that will enable that. And I'm also listening to the folks that are in it and saying what's working well for you? How can I kind of help build that up and kind of connect those dots? So that's kind of my challenge and kind of outlying focus for 2019.
I'm inspired by both of you. Terrific. Well, it's going to be a great 2019, a year of growth and community and mutual support. And I look forward to hanging out with both of you in that year. Thank you both. And I'm going to hand it over to Judy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for attending. It was a great discussion. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, here's everyone's email and Twitter handles. And also anyone can reach out on the OmniSparx Telegram channel. And we'd be happy to respond to any questions you might have. So this is the very last webinar in our webinar series. But the Chicago Blockchain Project and OmniSparx, we are both planning on continuing this series, but we want to hear from you. So reach out to us at OmniSparx on Telegram and let us know what you might be interested in hearing about. Thank you all. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.